A couple of weeks ago, I sent my niece an email saying I'd like to connect with her. She's an emergency room nurse. She's right in the front line, and she has an 18-month-old son. And I know that she's dealing with COVID daily. So the day before our scheduled talk, she wrote me an email and she said, I'm really looking forward to talking with you. I really like hearing about, what you can tell me about Buddhism. And she's been reading Venerable's book, An Open-Hearted Life. And then the last sentence in bold was, but please, can we not talk about COVID? So here we are, it's a global pandemic. She's an emergency room nurse. And I was about to give, or ask how she was doing with this and how she's working with her mind. And so that topic was off the table. So I said, that's fine. We'll talk about everything else. I wasn't sure what everything else was going to be in a global pandemic. But we started off talking about her son and, just life and family topics. And pretty soon we got around to COVID. It's the elephant in the room, right? But I really wanted to respect her request not to talk about it, so I let her bring it up. And then I saw that even though, she's early 30s, she's got a big support team at work, she's got a good extended family support team, lots of friends right now, the need to talk was big. We talked for a long time. We've talked more this year than any other year in our relationship. And she's 33. So then I've been connecting with my older relatives because I've just been noticing the need to connect. And so 2 of my mom's sisters are still alive. The youngest one is 85. And in April of this year, she's on 24/7 oxygen. So she has this 100-foot-long oxygen hose attached to her nose. And she moves around at a really good clip. She does, and she's the same age as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and she's really a fireball. And her fireballness, I think, was maybe what resulted in her tripping on her oxygen cord in April and falling and breaking her hip. So here it is, April 2020, right? It's Calgary, Alberta, but Calgary was not in good shape right from the get-go because they were one of 3 airports in Canada that were open to the international crowd. So the COVID cases in Calgary have been going through the roof, and because they've been acting slowly. So Alberta, which is where Calgary is really not in good shape right now because people just don't think they're going to get the virus. And they had this international airport open, and action on the government level was really, really slow. So I've been talking to her, and it's been such a pleasure because she is very active. She amazingly arranged it so that she didn't have to go to a rehab center after her hip surgery. She went right back home, and her granddaughter went and cared for her for 2 weeks, but only 2 weeks. Since then, she's been cooking for herself. Remember, she's 85 on oxygen. And she's been baking up a storm for friends who bring her groceries. And she plays the piano every day. And last year, I started to nudge her to start writing about her early experiences. I said, you've got novels in your head. And she does. And she's taken up the challenge, and every day she's writing. And I see that even though she says, I've got the kind of personality, I'm fine with this COVID thing, being alone. I'm absolutely fine. But our conversations are me trying to do this. But what do you think about? There's almost no entry place for conversation, which is great because she has this wonderful mind and she's telling me things and she's giving me advice, which of course I need. And I've been doing this with my mom's other sister who's 91, and her husband is still alive at 91. She's not so happy about this, but she has 2 daughters who are supporting her completely. Same thing, trying to get a word in edgewise on these calls, almost impossible. So I just, it's okay. Please tell me about your life. Our elders have experiences to share, but they want to share them now. And the same thing with my dad's sister-in-law. She's the last relative on my dad's side of, with his siblings who's alive. And she's as bright as anything. She's living in a facility in Red Deer, and that facility has not yet had a COVID case. And she's very grateful. She's really finding the loneliness a big deal. She can only see her daughter and her grandson. They're allowed 2 visitors, period. But she's quite fine with it, I mean, there's moments. But again, she has all these family stories that I'm getting that I've never heard before. So the point of this BBC talk today is, we're in this now for the next several months, this COVID landscape, and to really do what we can to reach out to people that we know. And then if you go to any kind of website that's in your city, you can find endless opportunities of how to reach out to people who are in deep need of connection, especially the elderly. So just to give you an example, I saw this marvelous story yesterday that, of course, I couldn't find today, and I wasted way too much time looking for it. But in essence, I think the bookstores in the United Kingdom, they had the idea, and they were inspired by this other place in Spain. I'll read you this one, because I did find that. The place in Spain has this project called Cuentos por Teléfono. How's that, Venerable Nima? Where are you? So it's Tales on the Telephone. And this group has organized it so that volunteers call the same person every time, as long as the person wants to be involved, and they find out what books the person is interested in, and they read to the person. They read their favorite book on the phone. And they do this at least once a week. So some of the elderly people that we know, you're losing eyesight, you can't get to the library, you don't have internet skills, perhaps, or maybe no internet connection, period. And in Spain, this is what they're doing. And they can't get enough volunteers to do this. So there was this other place, I think it's the United Kingdom, it's a bookstore, and they thought, well, let's see if there's anyone interested in this because, our traffic is down. And so they thought, well, maybe if we could get 20 volunteers to call the people that normally come to our bookstore, and we can do the same thing. We can read to our elderly friends or whoever wants to be read to. There's no age limit. And find out what books they like, and we'll get them reading. Well, again, the response was incredible on both sides. Hundreds of people wanted to be read to, and they had, in no time, 150 volunteers. So what a wonderful way to reach out to people during these times where people just have the need to connect and to share, life experiences. I found this other website that has some interesting, good ideas. You may like them, you may not, but they're seeming like common sense kinds of things that you can do. So again, the first one says, of course, pick up the phone, call relatives, friends, call neighbors, call people, that you know. Exercise with a friend or family at a safe distance. You can do this. You can go outside, be at least 10 feet apart, keep your mask on, those kinds of things. Here's one that's very nice. Spend more time in the park or a dog park. So whether you have a dog or not, maybe you just take a leash. Just so you look authentic. And talk to people, because dog owners like to talk to each other and dogs like to play, and you can get a connection going. Let's see, volunteer with your community support groups or outreach calls. Check on your neighbors who live alone. Well, this seems like a common sense thing, but I think sometimes we're so polite that we think, oh, well, they'll think that I'm intruding, that I'm sort of miscalculating their capacity, that they really don't need help. Thank you very much. But I would say risk it. What's the worst thing could happen if we ask someone if they need help? What would be the worst thing? No, thank you. Right, or just no. But I'm willing to bet that if we reach out to people that we see who are alone, regardless of their age, that we'll be getting a positive response. This particular website is based on a committee that I had no idea existed. It's called the International Council on Active Aging. And they say that social connections, we know this, are the threads that bind our communities together. By prioritizing human interactions and finding meaningful ways to connect during this time of physical distance and social isolation, we can support each other and our own health and well-being benefits as well. So it's a win-win proposition. It sounds like from our expert friends out there that we're going to be in this for quite some time, the COVID landscape. And so, this is the main way that we can put our Dharma practice into action right now. If you're not living in a monastery where you're dispensing teachings online, then we can really do our part and engage on the phone, on internet calls, you name it, knocking on neighbors' doors, and just finding creative ways of connecting with people out there. In volume 5 of the Library of Wisdom and Compassion series, there's a beautiful section in the beginning of the chapter about the four measurables. And His Holiness and Venerable Children write these words about the four measurables. And they are, may all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. And so here's their advice. One way to put these into practice in daily life is as follows. Love has the aspect of friendliness towards sentient beings and wishes them to have happiness in its causes. This should be our basic attitude toward any living being we encounter. That's our basic MO. When we see the suffering of sentient beings, we respond with compassion, abandoning any fear or disgust, and do what we can to be of assistance. When we witness their happiness, success, virtue, and good qualities, our response is empathic joy, the opposite of jealousy that so often plagues us. After that, we remain balanced and equanimous because our aims for sentient beings have been accomplished. However, sometimes we see others suffering or dukkha, and we try to help. But they're not open to our help, perhaps, and they're not open to us removing the causes of their suffering if we could, or if it's even possible. And at that time, rather than giving into frustration or despair, we practice equanimity. That's the best. In that way, the door remains open so that we can help them if an opportunity arises at that later date. So let's put our Dharma practice into practice and reach out as we can.